Hey, John, welcome. I'm really excited to have you on. I've been looking forward to this presentation. I'll just give a quick intro and then I'll let you sort of give your career sort of the background that it deserves. John's joining us today to talk about product management and his career spanning the Army to finance to Google and now Apple. And I'll let you get into more depth about that, but just wanted to say welcome to Xoogler School. Really excited to hear from you and looking forward to it. Thanks, John.
All right. Thanks, James. Thanks for having me.
Of
Uh,
course.
Good morning, everybody. Let me get my presentation up real quick. 1 second. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Sorry, 1 second, folks. There we
No
go.
worries. I was just before we were getting this started, I was complimenting John's camera. I don't think we've ever had a higher quality camera on one of these webinars. So thank you for raising the bar here. I think I need to tap into what you're doing with the DSLR.
I'm telling you, I will happily share everything about this camera setup after this for sure. Okay. All right. Screen looks good. Good morning, everybody. Um, Thank you for checking out this presentation. My name is John Zazenski. I am a senior product manager at Apple. And today I'm going to talk about how to pursue a career in product, parentheses, according to me. All right, first off, and I apologize, but this is probably going to be the longest slide of the entire presentation. But I think the very first thing that I want to discuss is I want to talk about my career path because it is super confusing and I love it. And I think it relates a lot to how I ended up where I ended up today. So let me start way back at the beginning. I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. Um, in 2000, I decided I wanted to be in California no matter what. If anything, just for the nice weather. And so I went to Santa Clara University, right out here in the middle of Silicon Valley. In 2000 or mid 2001, I ran into a problem I think a lot of students run into, and that I had taken on a lot of student loan debt just to fund my freshman year. And so around July, August of 2001, a friend of mine had recommended to me that I do Army ROTC, and the United States government would actually pay for all of my tuition. 2001, August 2001, that seemed like a pretty good idea. So I went ahead and I signed up, joined the Army, and then of course September of that year, the rest is sort of history. In 2004, I ended up graduating Santa Clara University with a bachelor's degree in organizational management. To be honest, it's kind of funny to look back on it now. I didn't think too hard about what my major was going to be, and I think a lot of that had to do with joining the military, because I felt like, well, I have a job afterwards. I guess I don't have to worry too much about this. Um, but anyways, I graduated in 2004. I was commissioned as an officer in the United States Army. I was an infantry officer, and it was pretty wild. It was definitely a baptism by fire. In 2006, I deployed to Iraq. I was embedded with an Iraqi Army unit for a year, basically teaching them, training them, living with them, going on patrols with them for an entire year. When I got back from Iraq, I commanded a couple of different training units, actually out in Mississippi, of all places. And then in 2008, right in the middle of the great financial crisis, I kind of decided that I didn't want to be in the Army anymore. My obligation was up. You can sort of opt in to stay in, maybe do full 20 and retire, or you can get out when your obligation is up. I kind of opted to get out. I felt like going to Iraq or Afghanistan didn't sound like a whole lot of fun. And I wanted to try my hand in the civilian world. Of course, I get out and I have no idea what I wanted to do at all. Didn't really think too hard through it. My wife at the time had worked for Smith Barney as a financial advisor, and that sounded like an awesome job. So I said I wanted to do that too. Given that it was 2008, there really wasn't a lot of financial firms that were hiring out there. And so I went door to door in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, knocking on the door of every single small financial firm out there, until finally one hired me, and I became a licensed financial advisor. I had my Series 7 and 66 license, and it was cool. It was wild. The markets were crashing. People were afraid. It was sort of my job to navigate, help them navigate through some of the chaos and protect what assets that they had. I learned a lot about capital markets and corporate strategy and finance. But I think one of the most important lessons I learned in that job was that I don't want to be in sales, and financial advisors in the beginning of at least is definitely a sales job. I love the strategy and the capital markets part, but the actual sales part of it, not so much. A couple years into that job, my wife and I decided we were both going to leave our careers in finance and move back to California, where her family lives, and I love it here. So we quit our jobs on the same day. We packed all of our stuff up and we drove out to California with not a whole lot of a plan, but it seemed like a fun adventure anyways. So we landed in California. And, I looked around and I realized I was coming to the heart of Silicon Valley. So this was kind of an opportunity to reinvent myself a little bit and maybe leverage some of the experience I got in the Army, which I didn't really use a lot in finance, specifically around operations, right? And most careers in the military, it's very operations focused. It's about getting the mission done. So I kind of wanted to get back into that, but also be a part of, sort of the new tech world that I was seeing unfold in front of me. I ended up getting a job at a medical device company called Stryker that had a manufacturing plant in South San Jose. And it was cool. I knew very little, actually basically nothing about medical devices. But they brought me on because I think they saw that I had some operational potential. And I started overseeing a couple of different production supervisor lines. Now, this is the part of the story where you're probably wondering, what does this guy who was in the Army and then managed production, it was a production supervisor, how did that turn into product manager? I will promise you I will get to that. But I managed some of their production lines. I ended up managing their global logistics systems, and things were going really well. I was actually really, really excited, but it wasn't enough. It actually kind of got to the point for me where I felt like, okay, I'm in the technology universe here, but I want to get closer to the center of that universe. And so I thought pretty hard, and I thought, how do I what's the closest point in that? What is that center of the universe? And in my mind, it was Google. So being relatively naive about, how to get into Google, I thought, I'll look for a job and I'll give them my resume. Maybe they'll give me a call. I ended up finding a role on Google Maps for operations program manager. I didn't know anything about digital mapping. I didn't really know about how Google worked as a company, but it sounded like a cool job. So I submitted my resume, and not really with a whole lot of high expectations. And sure enough, they called me back. A couple of interviews later, they blew my mind, with an offer to join the Maps team as a program manager. It was a dream come true, and still to this day, one of the biggest and most important pivot points of my entire career. I joined Google in 2012, July of 2012. And I ended up leading a couple of different teams on Maps, focusing on local listing operations. So, when you open up Google Maps and you navigate to your, favorite ice cream shop or restaurant or whatever, whatever you're navigating to now, which is probably not a whole lot for folks, but that actual listing, that was a lot of my world, in my operation team's world. During that time was really cool. I got to work with a lot of really cool product managers. They were all in our New York office. And so it was a great excuse for me to fly out to New York all the time, which was one of my favorite places. And a couple of years into that, Google does a great job of encouraging people to explore, their career throughout the company. They make it actually really easy, if you've been in a role for a while, to look at other roles and move to different parts of the company. Around that time, I was getting to the point where I felt like I'm learning some really cool skills. I learned all about, how Google engineering works, at least when it comes to maps and operations and product. And I started to think, what else can I learn about? And right around that time, a friend of mine happened to be working in the mergers and acquisitions integration team at Google. and had reached out and said, hey, we need some program managers. Google's starting to buy a lot of companies and we need all the help that we can get. I remember telling him very distinctly, I don't know anything about mergers and acquisitions. And he's like, look, he's like, you can learn, it's okay. But he's like, we just need people who can come in and get things done. And I've seen what you've done in maps, and I think maybe you should come over and give it a shot. So I figured that'd probably be a pretty cool thing to learn about, how Google actually acquires companies. And then what happens after the deal closes, right? I didn't have a lot of insight into that world. So I said, all right, let's do this. And I took the plunge. I joined Google's M&A team in 2014, and it was wild. I mean, Google was buying a company, like one company a week. So got immediately thrown into deals, and my primary role was to help coordinate all the cross-functional teams to figure out, once this company comes in-house, what do we do with their systems and their people and equipment and offices and all of those different things that not a lot of people think about when it comes to mergers and acquisitions. You usually think about the negotiations and how much people got paid and what the future could possibly hold, but it's all that stuff in between that became my world. And it was really, really cool. I ended up doing deals as an individual contributor for the first year. And then I ended up taking over a team of program managers. To this day, it was probably still one of my favorite roles. I think really most importantly, because I ended up leading a team of the most incredible people I've ever led, or one of the most incredible group of incredible people I've ever led. And it was really busy. And I think at the end of the day, what I really took away from it is, if you really want to understand a company's long-term strategy, look at their M&A, if they do M&A. Some companies don't, and you don't get the insight. But for Google, you could really start to understand how the leadership was thinking about the future by the companies that they were buying. And I became kind of obsessed with that. And as I became obsessed with that, it sort of turned into like this almost outside hobby. I just wanted to learn everything I could about the startup ecosystem, about all these industries Google was involved with, about our product strategy, just because I figured maybe this will be helpful one day. Towards the end of my tenure on the M&A team, I ended up working with a woman who was on Google's corporate development team by the name of Maria Shim. To this day, hands down, will go down as the smartest person I've ever met, and then also had the opportunity to work with. She was the senior deal lead. She was the one that would go out and cut a lot of the major deals for Google. And she's just an absolute legend. So her and I started talking, and she said, I might have some work later on that comes up. If you'd like to give me a hand with some of it, that'd be cool. She was kind of vague about it, but I was like, all right, yeah, whatever, not thinking about it. My wife and I had our second child right around that time. And so I was on Google's very generous paternity leave. And she gave me a call and she said, hey, when you get back, I have a project. It won't take much time, but get with me as soon as you get back. So I got back, and she told me that she had been asked to join a team called the Office of the CEO at Google. And basically it's comprised of a lot of different folks that make up the CEO staff and report to the chief of staff of CEO of Google, so Sundar's chief of staff. And she said, I'm putting together this presentation. It's going to be sort of a strategy, landscape type presentation. She's like, would you want to help me based on what we've talked about and your passion for technology and the industry? She's like, I think it'd be kind of cool. Plus, you're going to laugh, but I actually kind of like making slide presentations. So I was happy to do it. And I took a week off my regular job and I just worked on this project, and it ended up, I think, going really well. And it was well received by the leadership at Google. And for me, it was just the thrill that a bunch of executives actually saw the work that I did. I don't even think my name was on it. Didn't even care. I just wanted my work to go in front of them, and it did. And after that happened, she came back down to me and she said, look, I know, you like M&A, but would you join me and help co-found this function within the Office of the CEO, and basically developing industry insights and working on, special projects for the leadership team. So I was blown away by the offer, and of course I accepted. And I ended up joining that team, and I spent about a year and a half up there, and it was incredible. I got to read all day. I got investment banking analyst reports sent to me, by the dozens every single day. I got to read tech blogs. I got to talk to really cool and smart and, from my perspective, really important people. And then I got to summarize all of those thoughts into presentations that ended up going in front of Google's leadership team. Now, to be clear, I wasn't the one giving them, okay? I stayed at my desk in the corner. I didn't really want, that limelight, but for me, it was exciting to know that the ideas that I had were able to get down on paper and get in front of people who were making, huge difference in the company. And I think the world. And knowing that I was playing a teeny tiny part in that was just a major thrill. Did that for about 1.5 years. And as exciting as it was, I'm kind of a restless person. At the time, my manager, Marie, had come to me and she said, look, like, if you want to stay on this team and do this as long as you want, you can. She's like, we don't want to lose you. But she's like, if you're getting restless and you want to do something else within Google, just tell me where you want to go and we'll find a way to get you there. And I looked out, and after studying all of these companies in the space outside of Google and the startup ecosystem, I told myself, I think maybe I want to go try a startup. Around that time, a friend of mine had worked for an autonomous vehicle startup called Zoox that were building their own vehicle and mobility platform from the ground up. And he said they had an opening on the commercial development team. And so I jumped at that. I thought that sounded awesome. It was terrifying to leave Google after about 7 years, a little over 7 years. But I felt like this would be worth taking the plunge. So July-ish of last year, I left Google and I joined Zoox as a staff program manager on their commercial development team. And essentially it was helping them figure out what their go-to-market strategy would be, right? You have an autonomous vehicle that you built from the ground up, from scratch. How do you monetize it, right? How do you turn it into a rideshare platform that people will love? I thought that was wild and super cool and really exciting, right on the bleeding edge of the technology and the industry. I thought that was a great time to join. Plus, real talk, there could have been some pretty big upside to it too. And I think, like a lot of people in Silicon Valley, I thought I wanted to take a shot at that. So I did that for about 7 months. And then, as we all know, right around February, March timeframe, COVID hit. And COVID hit a lot of businesses hard, obviously, a lot of businesses hard, especially in the startup space. If you were pre-revenue and you were trying to raise money, you were in trouble. So Zoox was not in dire straits by any stretch, but it was getting to the point where I was like, they might need to start scaling back a little bit just to kind of get through these tough times. And they ended up doing a round of layoffs. I'd never been at a company that did layoffs before, and it kind of freaked me out. I wasn't impacted, but I started to see the writing on the wall. Do you keep the business person thinking 5 years ahead, or do you keep the software engineer that's working on your AI stack, like right now? My mind, I would keep the engineer, and I would definitely get rid of me. So I started to think maybe this isn't going to work out for me. And right around that time, Apple had actually given me a call and said, hey, we have a product manager position on Apple Maps. Would you be interested? And my first reaction, sort of like with M&A, sort of like with almost every role that I've had, I'm like, I've never been a product manager, but I would sure love to give it a shot. So they said, okay. So, we interviewed. Things went better than I expected. And here I am landing a role at Apple as a senior product manager, which is really exciting. When I first started the role, I was kind of terrified. And I started to think back to all of the amazing product managers that I'd worked with and the amazing strategic thinkers. And it was one of those things that, as I thought back to all of those people and those experiences, everything just clicked. And I started moving forward with that knowledge and that experience. And so far, so good. Now, granted, it's only been about 4.5, 5 months. I've never been to an Apple office. It's all been remote, which is a wild experience, but it's working out really well. And I am starting to realize that I'm in a position now that leverages all of the incredible experiences that I've been afforded. And I know this is a really long background, but when I look back on it, I start to realize that, like, as disjointed and confusing and nonlinear as my career path was, All of those things were actually preparing me extremely well for a role in product. So here I am, and here I am talking to you about it. And I think what I want to communicate across to you all today is that, there's a couple of different ways to get into product management. You heard one yesterday. That's definitely a very direct, efficient, and of course, challenging way to get in. I'm going to tell you a much longer route to get in, but I think one that could be extremely beneficial, especially, if you do end up getting to that product management. I know for me, at least, I'm extremely pleased that I was able to get all the experience I had and now finally apply it. So, all right, now these slides are going to go a whole lot quicker, and then we can get to your questions. But what does a product manager do? This is my interpretation. Obviously, there's a million definitions, and product management varies from company to company, but this is what does a product manager do according to John Zazenski. So take that for what it's worth. From what I can tell from the incredible product leaders that I've worked with in the past, and what I'm starting to see my role turn into now, is that product managers obsess over everything. I know, you're probably saying that right now, but it's kind of true and a little bit hyperbole. But what do I mean by everything? I found this a long time ago, and I thought that this image kind of sums it up pretty well. And essentially, product, of course, is that intersection of that tech and business and design. And then the management is kind of worrying about everything. But as a product manager, of course, you're obsessed with your users first. But then this is sort of everything that you have to think through and manage and consider the entire time you're doing your role. So breaking it down really simply, right, from the business side, this is going to vary from company to company, but I know for me, I think about the long-term strategy first. So for example, when I first joined Apple and I started meeting people, the first few questions I asked is, how does this product fit into Apple's long-term strategy? What is the long-term view? And how does this integrate into it? And then you start to get into more refined questions of getting a good idea of the business considerations. What are the resources that are required? What is the margin profile, if there is a margin profile? Things like that. Things you really have to consider, I think, as a good product manager. And then, of course, there's the tech. This is the part, at least for me, that I get extremely excited about. How is the product, of course, itself built? What are the engineering resources behind it? What are the limitations? What are the headaches? What are the pain points? What do we think is possible in the future? What technology are we excited about? That sort of thing. And then the design part. I'll tell you right now, it is breathtaking to be a part of an organization like Apple and their incredible design team. I could not have been more impressed. And when I look back on my career, if you're in the design world, coming out here and working with designers from companies like Google or Apple, or my former company, Xoogle, it's a humbling experience. These are seriously gifted individuals. And what's cool and what I really enjoy is, as a product manager, I get to work with them all the time. So design, business, and technology, if those are things that get folks excited, that's what you get to experience every single day as a product manager, because of course all of those things are going to weigh on the decisions that you'll ultimately make for the product. So you might be wondering at this point, all right, John, you shared this really long and somewhat confusing story about your career, and then you broke down the components of product management as you see them. So how do we get there from here? So I think in the next couple of slides, I'm going to probably rip through them a little quick. What I'd like to do is, kind of going back to what I feel like has been the theme of my career. It's been, what roles are out there that can get you, I think, high quality experience within those realms that make up product management that could prepare you one day for a career in product. And before I get into that, I think it's probably important to call out my philosophy on getting a job. I think for a long time, or at least in the early parts of my career, when I would look at a new role, I would tell myself, all right, standard assessment. What skills do I have? And what do I sort of like doing, and how do I find the thing that I sort of like doing and apply the skills to their maximum, so I can just get a job and do a great job applying what I already know. I did that for a little while, and then something happened, and maybe it was probably Google that did it, but what I ended up doing is sort of flipping it a little bit on myself. And when I looked at new roles, I would say, what could I learn from this role? What experience do I not have that I could gain by getting this new role? And what that ended up doing is it had me start running after roles that would probably terrify me in any other sense, right? Where I would say, I don't know how to do that job, but it got to the point where that became very exciting for me. And so as new roles came up, whether it was on Google Maps or M&A or Office of the CEO or autonomous vehicles or Apple product management, each one of those I knew could teach me something. Obviously, there was a hope and a prayer that I would do a good job. I mean, I felt relatively well equipped to do a good job, but a lot of it was sort of for selfish reasons. I was like, I think I want to get this experience. I think this could be valuable. And then with some of that experience, it opens up new opportunities afterwards. And I started to see that there's a compounding effect to that. And so that's the approach I ended up taking. The other thing too, and I just want to pass this along to everybody, with that line of thinking of collecting these opportunities, I take the phone call from every recruiter that calls me, no matter where they call me from, and almost no matter what the role is. I try to collect as many opportunities as I possibly can, because I've started to see the value of these wildly diverse experiences. So anyways, long segue into some of the examples that I've put together, right? So, okay, remember everything, we talked about that. So let's start talking through some of the roles, according to John, that I started to find that could probably, give you beneficial experience in these realms and eventually prepare you for a role within product, right? So, you ask yourself, like, how can I best experience these concepts? It doesn't always necessarily mean you have to work exclusively as an individual contributor or a manager within these realms to get the experience. Sometimes you can just work close to them on those sort of overlapping parts of the circles, the Venn diagram. But you have to ask yourself, like, how can I really get the most out of it, right? So a couple of different examples, like when it comes to tech, engineering, if you're already, in an engineering major and that's the track that you think you're going to be taking right out of school, like, cool, there you go. You got tech right. You got tech locked down, right? And, for me, I did not have an engineering background. Some places for product managers, they do require that. I didn't have it, but at the same time, I was fascinated by it. And I remember my time at Google Maps. I was the most annoying program manager ever for our software engineers, because one, I was like, these are Google software engineers. These are some of the best software engineers in the world. I just want to see how they work. And so I would just sit down with them all the time and say, what are you doing? And what does that mean? And how does that work? I was kind of like my 5-year-old daughter asking a million questions. But it was exciting. And also one thing that I picked up is people love talking about their jobs. So you're never going to probably get yourself into too much trouble if you ask people, hey, can I sit down and see what you're doing? People usually get pretty excited to talk about what they work on. But anyways, if you're looking for something that maybe gets you into this overlapping world between, say, business and tech, I felt like program management, which is a really broad term out here in Silicon Valley, is a great way to do that. Because at the end of the day, you're responsible for driving a project over the finish line. You work with a wildly diverse group of cross-functional partners. And you get to see sort of obviously both the tech side and learn a lot that way, but you also get to see the business side. What are the business objectives we're trying to achieve, and how do you get the tech side of the house to support those objectives. When you get into the business side of things, sort of strictly on the business side, corporate development is kind of a tough spot to beat as far as the experience on that. And the reason I say that is obviously business is extremely broad and there's a lot of different roles there. But what I saw, at least at a place like Google, is that the corporate development team were responsible for executing that long-term acquisition strategy. And it's not just acquisitions, it's divestitures and joint ventures and corporate direct investment. But they have to be experts on what Google leadership's long-term strategy is in order to do their job. So it's a great way to kind of crack into that world and immediately start to get a good idea of what the long-term strategy is at that company. Sort of blending this business and design, I put business operations and strategy because it's a way of thinking about how products serve users and how that achieves business goals. At Google, one of the most impressive teams that I've ever found was the BizOps team, right? They're like consultants, but designers and engineers, and they have these really wild, really fascinating backgrounds, and they sort of straddle that world between business and design and product and everything else. Really fantastic place to sort of see how those two things come together to extend the company's reach into new markets or continue growth in an outstanding product. Obviously for design, we're talking UI and we're talking industrial design. I'd say if you are already in that world and you have that artistic ability, keep pursuing this path, especially out here. Designers are always some of my favorite people because I think when you go to a company, a lot of people think in a very sort of structured and organized way. One of the things that was exciting to me about working with design teams is they can't think too structured. They obviously have to be unstructured to let new ideas flow. So it's fun to go hang out with them. You go hang out in their design studio, which always has cool music and good snacks and cool artwork up, and very unlike probably the cubicle farm that everybody else works in. And it's just sort of an inspiring group to work with if you get the opportunity. And if you are a designer, you're in for a pretty cool ride. And then, finally, you get to UX. I think back to my role when I was at Zoox, and I worked with the UX team pretty often because it's go to market. You have to start thinking through like, what are our people in our target? When we launch this thing, what are they going to experience? And this was really cool because you start to think like, you start from like, what, wonderful moments do you want to give the user? And you come up with these incredible storylines, and then you take that over to the engineering team and you say, I think we want to build this. And clearly there's going to be a negotiation. And as a product manager, you're going to be there helping managing those negotiations. But it's wild to think of, the ideas that you can come up with. When I was at Zoox, we always talked about things like, when you step into a vehicle, an autonomous vehicle, and you're playing music, should it just be picked up by the stereo system in the car and continue there? And should it know the temperature that you like based on the ambient temperature outside? And should it preheat or cool down to suit your needs? Things like that. And then we have the technological capabilities to support that. So really, really exciting space. And I think at the end of the day, when you look at this image of product management, there are tons of ways to experience all of these things, to build up your base level of knowledge, connections, experience, to prepare you for a role in product, because you start to see how everything works in all of the different realms. The other benefit to this, and this is where I'm going to get to tying it together, is that, as a product manager, you're working across tons of different functions, and you want to be able to sort of talk the talk, and you want to walk the walk with the people that you're speaking with. And no one's going to expect that you have previously necessarily been an engineer or in corp dev or industrial design or any of those things, but the more experience you've had in those realms that you can bring to the table, the more respect that you end up gaining with those cross-functional partners. And I think the further you can go. Now, I'm going to throw one last curveball at you, and then I promise I'll stop talking. There is one more way that I did not outline, because I haven't done it myself, but I can tell you it's one of the most effective ways to be a good product manager. The final way to really get a lot of it, of the experience that are required of a great product manager, and probably the hardest way to do it, but I'd argue the best way to do it, is to start your own company, right? Because at the end of the day, when you're a founder, you're essentially the first product manager. It's your job to obviously come up with the idea, and then figure out, how do I get the technology to support this or build it? How do I get it designed in the way that would be pleasing to the market I want to target? And then what is our business strategy? How are we paying for all of this? Where do we want to be in a couple of years, right? You're doing all of that as an entrepreneur. And the reason I didn't bring it up is because I haven't done it myself, but I've watched it happen in front of me, and it's amazing. I was having a conversation a few months ago with my wife. She was a former Googler, and she left to start a company last year. And as I watched her go through everything, through the process of starting a company from scratch, I realized, like, oh my gosh, you're like a super product manager as a founder, right? And so I would say too, I gave you a million different, I think, avenues to approach this, but at the end of the day, if you get out and you start your own thing, that's going to get you all of that, right? That's going to get you that experience really quick. And it's going to be hard. And I would definitely argue, you don't have to start a company that ends up being some wild success. I mean, if you do, that's obviously incredible, but just attempting it and trying to pull it together alone is going to give you such an incredible foundation and set you up for product. For me, I look back on my career and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I feel like looking at each new role as an opportunity to learn and experience something new, even if it had nothing to do with my last role, has benefited me greatly. And I'd say, if I could leave you with anything, it's don't be afraid to take weird jobs. Clearly, there is no direct path. I mean, there is, you can take the direct path, but you can take these wild winding roads to get to where you want to go. And I think have a really good time, have some pretty incredible experiences. And frankly, I think you just become a pretty interesting person. If you just have stories to tell and adventures that you've been on, I think a lot of that starts to become reflected in your work, and you start coming up with interesting ideas and interesting products and things that kind of accelerate from there. So yeah. Now, granted, I haven't experienced anybody else's lifetime, so that's just been mine, but so far so good. And every time I get into a new role, I actually start to get excited about whatever the next scary role I'm going to be taking is, because clearly I can't predict at all what's going to happen next. What always makes me laugh too, by the way, is when you're in an interview, and I don't think many places ask this question, but sometimes they'll ask the question of, but what do you want to be in 5 years? I've never gotten that right. I don't even answer that question anymore when asked. I'm like, I don't know. But that's the point. I'm glad I don't know where I'm going to be in 5 years. I hope it's someplace exciting. So that is my presentation, everybody. I've talked for an extremely long time. So I hope that spurred some questions that you've had, and I'd like to answer all of them. So, all right, ask me anything.
Wow, John, thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed your presentation. Enjoyed that last note as well, because I don't think many of us know where we're going to be, especially a lot of us are college age, where we're going to be in 5 years. So I'm sure that everyone really relates to that. But also hearing about your career and the different things that you sort of picked up and that helped you become the person that you are today, and the different ways that other people can sort of take from their experiences. It has been really insightful, and I think definitely got me thinking. So I'm sure that it got everyone else who's tuning in thinking as well.
Wow.
Yeah, but with that said, I think I'll definitely look at the Dory and start asking you all these questions that are coming in.
Sure. Let me
love
stop sharing my screen right there. That's a little better. Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, and I am once again reminded that I need to get a better camera. So thank you. I'm seeing the two of us lined up next to each other. Okay, the first question here is, if you could give, this is from Jennifer, if you could give one advice to yourself back when you joined the Army, what would it be and why? So currently, what would you go back and tell yourself?
Oh, I love that question. Oh, that's so great. Honestly, I would say, don't be afraid. This is going to sound like it makes no sense, but I would say don't be afraid to take jobs that you seem wildly unqualified for and terrified of. Um, you know, like I said, I think throughout my career, I started to learn. I mean, when I started to learn a few things about job descriptions in general, like they're sort of designed to have people filter themselves out of the process, right? And you know, for me, instead of looking at a job description and saying these are all the reasons why I wouldn't be qualified, I'd actually just try to find the one or two things that would hint to me that I might actually be qualified for it. And then the hope is that maybe I'd interview with somebody that could see my potential rather than just say, oh, you don't have enough experience. Now, in that, it's scary because what if they get you, what if you get the job? You know, now what's the expectation that you have to perform well? And that part is scary, but I think I would go back and tell myself, don't be afraid of that. You'll figure it out. And if you don't, it's not the end of the world. But it's worth a shot because if you do figure it out, that's experience, that's a new pathway that you could take. I think it took me a little bit longer than I expected it to for that lesson to land. So I definitely go back and tell young John that for sure.
Awesome. And then a question, which is, can you give a breakdown of your day at Apple? I guess, I mean, with respect to the confidentiality, and compare it to your role at Google.
Yeah, you know, at Apple, it feels fairly traditional as far as like my daily, you know, for me, a lot of my role revolves around obviously like defining product requirements. You know, you kick that process off and it's a load of analysis. So I spend a lot of the day actually meeting with people from our, you know, data science teams and analytics teams, looking at like reams and reams of data to start to figure out what will fit well with some features and what won't with others. And then it's meeting with a bunch of different cross-functional partners. I'll meet with designers pretty often. I'll meet with program managers. You know, at Apple, one of the things that I'm learning, and one of the reasons I really like it is Apple's a lot about personal relationships with each other. It's actually a really flat organization. So I spend a lot of my day actually in one-on-ones with coworkers, understanding what they're working on. They can understand what I'm working on, pulling out the things that I need to know to help build a better product, but also just getting to know people, especially now we're all remote. There's not sort of the chit chat you would have in the office. And so I spend a lot of time on VC in one-on-ones with people, just having conversations about everything to get to know them better, to sort of strengthen a lot of those interpersonal bonds as we're working on, you know, building pretty sweet products. I'll say that.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, no, I would definitely back you up. The products, everything everyone loves. I'm obviously calling in on a MacBook right now. But Sam's wondering, is work experience absolutely necessary to break into PM roles?
You know, I don't think so. You know, you never know until you try. Like I said, when you go back to some job descriptions, they might say that this is like a hard and fast requirement for you, but you never actually know until you sort of put yourself out there and you see, you know, are they interested in at least having a conversation with me? I would say, you know, in most product roles, if you're working on like a really sort of like big meaty project, you know, obviously they're going to want to see some background in something. They want to know that you had, you know, some level of expertise or performed well doing something that would relate even tangentially to the product. But it's not always necessarily true. And what I'd say is don't make that determination yourself. Allow, you know, the place that you apply to or the company you're talking to, the manager you're speaking with, allow them to make that determination about you, because there might be something that they see in you that you don't see in you. And you know, I think back in my career, that's probably the other thing I would mention in this presentation is that I owe my career to the people that saw something in me that I did not see in myself. And there's a lot of them. And by putting myself out there, I think that's where I got the opportunity to meet those people. And I would encourage all of you to try to find those people that can see that thing in yourself that you don't necessarily see.
Yeah, no, wow, that's really strong advice. And I've there's a question here that absolutely follows up on that, and like looking for people, I guess, that see that in you. And so the question's on its phrase is convincing someone to interview, to hire you, where you might have like limited experience, or you might not meet all the qualifications. But I guess I would sort of frame that as how have you met those people that and how do you sort of connect and sort of offer up like the best version of yourself that they'll be able to see those aspects like you're talking about?
There's some that you can, some aspects of that you can control, and then some that you can. And as far as the parts that you control, at least for me, I try to put myself out there as much as I can. Anytime I find, events, industry events in the area, out here, for example, being a veteran, there's a lot of really great like veteran support events and stuff out here in Silicon Valley. Andreessen Horowitz, a big venture capital firm, holds pretty regular events, or they used to pre-pandemic. And I would take the opportunity to go to them every time that I could and meet as many people as I can. Even within the companies that I was working in, it was just a matter of making those connections, and not just like business connections, like, oh, hey, we like the same work stuff, but like personal connections, like connect with people, that you can develop friendships with, right? Because you wouldn't want to work with people that you probably wouldn't want to be friends with anyways. That part I could control, and I'd say, you have to go after that. The other part to it, though, is what you can't control is whether or not they've been convinced that you can do the job or not. You can't control that. But if you've collected as many options and opportunities as you can, if one says no, you hopefully have 3 or 4 in your back pocket, right? What's helped me in my career is not sort of putting all my chips on one bet. I always have backups on backups on backups, which allows you to think get a little less stressed out about things, because you're thinking, okay, obviously my dream is to go work for XYZ company, but there's 3 other companies that are awesome too, that if this doesn't work out, yeah, I'll be bummed about it, but I'll go try those other ones. And while you can't control whether they're convinced or not, you want to try to find as many as you possibly can that'll be talking to you. And that starts, I think, with those connections and meeting people and, building those relationships.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I 100% agree. Networking and making those connections, it's almost like a full-time job, just making sure that you're maintaining those. I'm sure you have to maintain hundreds and hundreds of those relationships, and that's definitely a huge aspect of what you're saying.
Yeah, it is. But you know what? The other thing too is if you're friends with them, yeah, I mean, if you develop like, a true friendship, it you don't even think about it as work. You're like, these are just cool people I like. You know what I mean? If you start to feel like maintaining really connections is work, then those are probably not connections that are worth maintaining. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
don't know what I've seen.
No, absolutely. It should be easy with the right people. Absolutely. Question from Yara. She says, "Hi, John. I saw that you attended the Stanford Advanced Project Management Program. It's been discontinued since then. What are some of the most important things it taught you, and what do you recommend studying to gain the same level of info?"
I'm glad that you asked about that. When I attended it, this was back when I was in mergers and acquisitions, and I think I was in the thick of a lot of deals, and I was managing a team of program managers. And as I was learning a lot of the concepts from the SAPM, it was a great program, but I actually started to realize I was learning more at a quicker pace doing my day-to-day job than I was actually spending time in the course. Um, it's one of those things that when there's sort of risk on the line and the rubber meets the road, the concepts of say program management, I think, come to you a lot quicker than if you're watching them on a slide and taking a couple of tests. I thought the program was okay. There's also there's another program management designation out there that I've heard good things about. Those are all great, but at the end of the day, there's no replication for experience. When it comes to program management, there's a million different ways that you can do it. I've seen people that love all of these wildly complex project management, software suites that you use, and other people that carry a notebook with them and manage billion-dollar projects out of a notebook, right? So I think what I've learned is going out and actually getting that experience is 10 times more valuable than some of those programs. I will say though that I'm working through the Chartered Financial Analyst program. That is pretty worth it, because you learn the true depths of capital markets and corporate finance that are hard to find anywhere else. So that one I'd actually recommend. Nothing to do with program management, not a lot to do with product management, but does become useful in the future.
Got it. Thank you. Question here on sort of, you were speaking on, you don't know where you're going to be in 5 years, never have. And I really, I respect that. And I think it's a good thing to be fluid and, and waiting to see what the next opportunities are going to be. But a question on that, and that's, what metrics do you use to determine like what's a good risk or a good opportunity to take and when it's time to let go?
Well, I wouldn't say that like I have any specific metrics. It's more like, and I know this is it's sort of a cop-out answer. I just get like an itch um, that I need to, I start to find that like if I'm getting a little bored or a little more stressed than I'm used to being in a role, that's sort of my indication that maybe it's time to go. I had a sergeant way back in the Army, definitely one of the best leaders I've ever seen. He told me one time, if you're not a little bit afraid to go into work every single day, meaning to face the challenges that you have to, you're probably in the wrong role. And when I start to feel like it's more just like a hassle and a burden to go into a role every day, that tips me off that like maybe it's time to find something new. Now, as far as the risk goes, I mean, the biggest risk for me is I go out and try to look for something and find nothing, and I have no job and no income, and that's a little scary, but you can prepare for that. But really, and maybe it's perspective of the military, but I'm like, look, if I'm not going to get physically armed out there, it's not like somebody's going to come and take all my money or hurt my family or anything like that, then I'll go out there and give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, okay, I've made connections. I can call people. I can ask for help. I have all of these things that sort of support me that help mitigate a lot of that risk and that sort of feeling, that fear of the unknown when you get out there.
Got it. Thank you. And Lauren's wondering, do you think the privilege of being like a white male affected your career path and the ability to get your foot in the door? What advice do you have, or if you have any, for women and POCs trying to break into the industry?
That's a great question. I totally do. And I recognize that, kind of going back to even the commentary that I've made about wondering whether or not I have the skills or not to do a certain job and that I should just dive in and hope they see my potential. Like I recognize there's like a lot of privilege that benefits that allows me to think that way. Right. But I would say what I would argue, or I would tell you the advice that I'd give you is to, as best you can, try to adopt that mindset of taking that risk, even if you don't feel like you have all of the skills required. You know, I can't imagine myself, because again, being a white male, like walking into that situation, it's a different perspective. But what I could say is, when you're looking at those roles, don't sell yourself short. You don't know the potential, like I said, that somebody else might be seeing in you, and that you should be, I would argue, you should be pursuing those roles that you want as aggressively as possible. And like I said, don't limit yourself. We live in a world where it's easy to make a lot of assumptions about how people might think or feel out there. I would hope, I'm an eternal optimist, even in the way the world is structured today. I'm an eternal optimist, and I'd say, go out there with the hope that things will be better, that people will put biases aside, and go for what you want, and hope that they see that potential in you. Right? Hope, that would be my advice. Good question, though.
Absolutely. And sort of to ride off that theme of advocating for yourself, what advice do you have to college students that have less experience, and may lack some of the qualifications? How do you show your potential early on in your career and advocate for yourself?
I think it comes down to, like I said, it comes down to making those connections, right? Whether it's at your first company or it's at events, because at the end of the day, you can advocate for yourself, all you want, but you can only speak with so many people at a moment, right? The more people that you get to know the real you, the more advocates actually you create in this world for you, right? And so you kind of get this system that becomes alive and sort of self-perpetuating. And then, you're not worried about yourself running around. You have other people that are likely saying good things about you to other people. And that, what I've seen, that helps you go really far. That after a while, you start to realize that, like, oh, wow, like I'm getting a lot of email on LinkedIn, when people are saying, oh, hey, I know so-and-so, they're really great at X, Y, and Z, or they just got out of school, super smart, lots of potential, tons of energy. You should give them a shot. Like, you want to create those advocates for you in addition to advocating for yourself.
It's great advice. Thank you. And the question, which is more about sort of making decisions, and that's we live in an age where a lot of decisions are being backed by quantitative analysis. However, there are situations where there's no data. What are some of the techniques you use to gather support when you don't have anything quantitative to back up your design or your product decisions?
That is that is a great question. Well, first off, I'm going to start with a book recommendation. Nassim Nicholas Taleb, The Black Swan. I've read that book, I think 15 times already. All of his books are amazing. They talk about this exact thing. What do you do about when you don't have the data that's going to tell you what's going to happen next? Well, what's interesting is that at the end of the day, nobody knows what's going to happen next, right? So for me, the way that I look at it is I prepare, if I'm about to make a decision, I prepare for all of the possible outcomes. So let's say we have to greenlight this product, right? We don't have all of the data to tell us that it's going to be a wild success, but we're under a time crunch and we got to do it. The way that I look at that is what could happen next? What's the best thing that could happen next? What's the worst thing? What's the thing in the middle? And how do I prepare for those outcomes? What steps can I take to prepare for those outcomes? So if things go really well, do we have the data center capacity to handle all the new users? If things go okay, do we have a really good maintenance plan to make sure things continue to go okay and then focus on growth? And if things go really, really badly, do we have an exit plan for this feature? How do we deprecate it? How do we get out of it? So when you don't know what's going to happen next, just think about the possibilities. I like pulling people into a room and doing like a whiteboard sesh, and we just brainstorm. What are the best things that could happen and what are the worst things that could happen? And I actually find myself running most of my life that way. And you end up walking around actually feeling pretty prepared for whatever is going to happen next in absence of good information or good data.
Awesome. I'm going to wrap up with two sort of following like what you just said, more life and philosophy sort of type of questions. And one is from How Wei, and he said he's writing an editorial on your talk. So his question is, can you sum up your life philosophy in a sentence?
Yeah, I'm gonna borrow a quote, okay? And I don't know who, I can't attribute this quote to anybody. I don't know who said it, but somebody said it smarter than me. It's not what we don't know that gets us into trouble. It's what we know for sure that just ain't so. I think that's what I've been living my life by for the last like 15 years. And what I mean by that is always questioning what I feel like I'm totally confident in. And exploring more about what I don't know about the world, about my career, about products, about tech, about everything is much more relevant and important to me than sitting there honing in on the things that I do know, because the world is much bigger than me, and what I don't know is much, much greater than what I do know. So I try not to get too comfortable with the knowledge that I have, and it keeps driving me to learn more and do more and experience more.
Also, I think that might have to go up on my whiteboard behind me too. You can't see it because of the Zoom background, but I love that quote. And I think I'll wrap up with one final question here from Lauren, which is, could you share any general advice you have on remaining an optimist in life?
I don't know. I guess it's just always been sort of my way of things. I want to say that ultimately, like, I feel like people are good. And most people want to do the right thing. It just doesn't always work out that way. Not everyone, and don't assume it's everyone, but I think most people do. And I think that keeps me optimistic about the future. I try to see the humanity. There's a lot of imperfections, but I think overall, it's always a trend that, there's a trend in the positive direction. As painful as sometimes it might seem, and sometimes it might seem hopeless, but I've been to combat and I've been in some pretty hopeless situations, and I've actually found a lot of good in the world and a lot of good in people in those hopeless situations. So I think for me, that's helped me keep that perspective, and that's stuck with me. And I see it come out now during what we're going through, all of us right now. While there's a lot of ugly in the world, there's a lot of good there too. Sometimes you just have to look a little bit harder for it, but I try to look a little bit harder when I can.
Awesome. John, thank you so much for sharing your entire career, sort of more about product, and then also more about your life philosophy. It's been really really great to get to know you and get to know your career, and thank you for answering this slew of questions that came in. Really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been an honor to speak. Hopefully, folks took away something. If anything, I like talking about this stuff, so I'm always happy to. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or whatever. Send me a note. I'm happy to chat.
Awesome. Yeah, I encourage all students to do so. John, thanks for joining, and thanks everyone for joining on the YouTube live as well. Really a great session, and looking forward to tomorrow's sessions on VC, getting into VC with Danielle from a liberal arts major, and then also another product conversation, but more on data-driven product management and a career path as a woman in tech from Anna. So looking forward to that, and definitely follow up on our YouTube. Make sure you subscribe so you can see all these events. And John, thanks again so much. I'll leave the schedule up for everyone for tomorrow, and best of luck with Apple. And I hope that at some point you can go back and go actually and visit the office in person, maybe. Fingers crossed.
One day, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. All right. You have a great day, John.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.